This is John Lomax interviewing Mr. A.L. Cook of Forest Hills, Dallas, Texas, and asking his opinion about the unprovoked attack made on America by the Japanese. Mr. Cook, how do you feel about this attack made by the Japanese?
Mr. Lomax, I feel the attack made by the Japanese on Hawaii and Pearl Harbor was very uncalled for at the time being. President Roosevelt and Cardinal Hull had been making every effort for the last 2 months by which to work out a peaceful solution with the Japanese government by which to continue with their trade and have a peaceful government with them and the United States. But since they have attacked the United States, I feel that the President has all the rights and should have it, and Congress should give it to him, all the right and power by which to prosecute war in every phase against the Japan government.
What business are you in, Mr. Cook?
I'm in the oil business.
Well, how is this war going to affect your business?
Mr. Lomax, I feel this way. Don't know just exactly how it's going to affect my business, but I do say this, that whatever it takes as far as my business is concerned, I'm willing to pledge it for the peaceful solution, a permanent peace for the United States.
Well, how about your friends and acquaintances in Dallas?
Everybody that I have talked to since the attack of Japan on Hawaii and Pearl Harbor feel like that the President had done everything that was in his power to try to bring about a peaceful solution. Since that has not come about, they are willing now to do anything by which to back up the President of the United States in doing their part toward defeating Japan.
Even if we have to raise $150 billion?
Yes, sir, even if we have to raise $200 billion. I might add right here, Mr. Lomax, that I believe that the Japan government was not behind the move that they made altogether. They have been prompted and pushed by the German government to make this attack for the reason I believe they feel that their the German move on Moscow has come to a standstill, and the Germans feel that that has come about by the help that the United States and Great Britain has been giving them in the last 4 or 5 months. And Germany feels that by giving aid to Japan and pushing Japan into declare war on the United States will handicap this aid to Moscow or to Russia and will lessen his fight on the Moscow front. Not only that, but will get Japan's Navy into the fight and will probably open up the Mediterranean to where he can send some help to his men in South Africa.
Well, you arrive at this opinion just from your general reading or from talks among your friends, or how?
From reading and also talks amongst my friends.
You haven't any acquaintances that have traveled throughout the world and brought these opinions to you?
No, sir, I do not, Mr. Lomax. I've just gathered the information from the laymen on the street and my acquaintances.
Well, you don't think there's any doubt about the loyalty of Dallas, Texas, and Dallas County and the whole state of Texas to the government in fighting the Japanese at this present time, do you?
I feel like that the people of Dallas and Texas are going to be 100% behind the President in anything he needs. The Texas have one of the greatest commodities that will be in use during the fight, which is oil, and they're willing to pledge that 100%.
This is Dallas, Texas, December the 9th, 1941. John Lomax speaking. Professor Charles S. Potts is before the microphone, Dean of the Law Department of Southern Methodist University at Dallas. And I'm going to ask Mr. Potts to introduce himself and tell a little about his previous record before he became a law professor, and then tell me what his reactions were when he heard that the Japanese had attacked America.
Mr. Lomax, I am a native Texan. I grew up on a farm near the city of Weatherford. I taught in the public schools and later attended the University of Texas, taught in the A&M College of Texas, later took the law course in the University of Texas and entered the law faculty of that institution. Later, I attended Harvard University Law School for 1 year and then taught law for 1 year in Washington University at St. Louis. I've been at Southern Methodist University since 1927. Now, as to my reactions in regard to the Japanese attack, I will simply state that I was not surprised that treachery marked the beginning of this war. I recall that in 1904, the attack on Russia was made while friendly relations were still being maintained, and several of Russia's strongest battleships in the east were sunk before any declaration of war was issued. I expected, therefore, treachery and a sudden attack. I was surprised, however, that it succeeded at Pearl Harbor. How they could have approached so close to our great naval base without being discovered by our patrol airplanes is beyond my understanding. Now, as to the result of that attack, my judgment is that Japan has done herself no good whatever by that attack. I believe that it has served to unify American sentiment and anger our people to the extent that we will do a very much better job of arming and carrying on the war that has been thrust on us than we would have done had it begun in some less spectacular fashion. My belief is that Japan is in no position in the long run to sustain the war that will come as a result of their action on Sunday. How they'll be able to meet the British force, the Dutch, the Chinese, the United States, and perhaps Russia in a long drawn-out war is beyond my comprehension. But we're going to suffer losses, probably grievous losses. We're a long way from the scene of battle, and our lines of communication will therefore be difficult to maintain. I hope that Congress will move forward and recognize the fact that in this war we're fighting three nations and not one, and not leave it for Germany to say when and where the shooting war will begin. I hope Congress will declare war on both of the other Axis powers at once.
As far as you can go. Mr. Jameson, I just got a telegram from the Library of Congress in Washington, and they want the ideas of a few average men and women recorded on their reactions when they heard of the Japanese aggression. These records will be used in a historical record being accumulated in the Library of Congress and possibly for radio broadcasts. Now, will you tell me what you thought when you heard of what the Japanese government had done to the American government?
My first thought was, what a great pity that the world at large, that another nation should be added to those aggressors who strove to limit our freedom. I find myself at the age of 80, an old woman, hanging on to the tail of the world, trying to keep up. I do not want the driver's seat, but of the eternal verities, there are certain things that I wish to express. One thing that I am very sure of is that hatred is death, but love is life. I want to contribute to the civilization of the world, but I remember that the broadness of our sympathies is the measure of our civilization. And when I look at the Holocaust that is going on in the world today, I'm almost ready to let go of the tail feathers of the world.
Where is your home, Mrs. Jameson?
In Redondo Beach, California.
And how long have you lived there?
About 20 years.
And what are you doing out in Texas?
I'm visiting my children, whom I've often visited before.
Mrs. Stillwell, would you like to add something to what your mother has said?
Mother, you've been living in the neighborhood where there are a good many Japanese people. Do you think that affects your attitude toward them at all? What is your general impression of the Japanese as a race?
The general impression of the Japanese that I have seen and come in contact with is very different from what my impression would be if I had been in touch with the military division of the Japanese in their native. My impression is modified by what I read and hear of those. My impression of the Japanese as I have seen them is that they are law-abiding and desirable citizens, with exceptions.
Miss Stillwell, have you anything to add to what your mother has said?
Well, of course, my point of view is very different, but my first reaction was that either the Japanese were a very, very conceited race or that they were very, very desperate. Somehow I just can't believe that a little island like Japan can attack the United States and hope to be successful in the long run.
What are your initials, Miss Stillwell?
This is Jerry Stillwell.
This is John Lomax speaking. The last lady on the microphone was Mrs. Jerry Stillwell, the daughter of Mrs. Lena Jameson, who spoke first on this record. This record was made in Dallas, Texas, December the 9th, 1941, for the Library of Congress in Washington. I have in my hand here a telegram from the Library of Congress requesting the reaction of some Dallas people on the Japanese aggression. I'd like to know, Mr. Ruggles, how that announcement of what the Japanese were doing to us reacted on you as a World War veteran.
Well, I don't think it's wholly unexpected. Anybody that kept up with news events should have anticipated an attack by Japan. It's wholly in keeping the methods employed by the totalitarian powers, the unexpectedness of it. And as far as the war with Japan is concerned, I think that is something that the informed American public has been expecting to be something that would develop ultimately for a period, say, of the past 30 years, more especially during the past 10 years.
No. Why do you? How did you come to that opinion?
Well, that dates. There's been friction between the Japanese and the talk of the Yellow Peril ever since for the past 3 or 4 decades. With the invasion of Manchuria in 1931 was the first aggressive step that really led the way, as I understand it, have concluded, to show Hitler and Mr. Mussolini the way.
Well, you think then the Japanese are acting in concert with Messrs. Hitler and Mussolini then, as I take it?
Due to their attacks, they are in a way. But the Japanese have always acted primarily for themselves. Their plans as to Asia, and the fact that they believe that their domain should extend over the Asiatic scope.
Well, what did you first think? What were your first thoughts when you heard of this attack on Americans, Dan? What first came to you?
Well, the first thing that came to me is it was just something that could not be avoided, as to be expected. That we've made every effort in the world to avoid it, but that it was something that's bound to come owing to the world situation.
Tell us a little about yourself. Who are you?
Well, I'm a man that's really been a newspaper editor most of my life and sold it some. And I've had a keen interest in international affairs and have kept track. I guess I've kept abreast of the times, owing to the fact, as I say, that I've mainly been employing editing newspapers and am interested in international affairs primarily.
This is Dan Ruggles that's just been speaking. Mr. Ruggles lives in Forest Hills, Dallas, Texas, and has been for many years a newspaper reporter. This interview with Mr. Ruggles occurred on December the 9th, 1941, and this recording was made for the Library of Congress in Washington. Mr. Ruggles wishes to add this further word.
Well, I think that the American people must not come to a jump to conclusion, either through the early reverse in this war, or otherwise that it's going to be an easy war. The Japanese naturally have handicaps due to the Allied forces in the Far East now facing them, but the efficiency of the Japanese military machine has been repeatedly proven.
Texan. Wait a minute. You cutting? I'm a native Texan. I'll be almost 59 years of age the middle of this month. I've been educated in Texas. Graduate of the University of Texas in both the academic and the law department. Practiced law in Texas until the time
the First World War broke out. I went in the first officers training camp and served 25 months. Then I came out discharged as a captain in field artillery.
This is Mr. Edward Crane talking, and this is John Lomax speaking at the present moment, and he has Mr. Crane before the microphone to ask him, as a representative citizen of Dallas, if he won't give to the American people his reactions when he heard of the Japanese aggression against this country that happened on the past Sunday morning. Mr. Crane.
Well, it's difficult for me to express my language in printable language, my thoughts in printable language. When I saw what happened, I admit that while I've never had a very high opinion of the Japanese, their conduct in this particular situation has lowered them even in my estimation of them, which is low enough. Frankly, I think there's only one thing for this country to do, and that is we ought to realize the fact that we're in a war to the finish. The issue raised is one where there's no place for compromise. In other words, it's a war to the death. There are two civilizations involved, both of which cannot exist. Frankly, my view is, and I include the Hun, or the German so-called, in what I have to say about the Japanese. That is, we ought to exterminate both of them. There's no place for either of those races in the world today. As I say, it started with, there is no compromise involved. There are two civilizations, or rather a civilization, as I call it, which represents the American and English viewpoint on one side, and the Han and the Jap on the other. It's going to be a long war, probably run 6 or 10 years. But we ought to realize the fact there can't be any compromise, and either one of two solutions is bound to follow. That is, that the Hun and the Jap will go down, or this country and England will go down. It's unthinkable for 1 minute to conceive the idea that the Hun and the Jap will prevail.
So far as your experience goes, and your communication with other Texans, Mr. Crane, what do you think the reaction of the Texas people is to what has happened in the last few days?
I think that what I have stated represents the overwhelming sentiment of the people in Texas today.
This interview was held at Dallas, Texas on December the 9th, 1941, and was made for the use of the Library of Congress in Washington. Dr. Terrell, I've had a telegram from Washington asking me to secure the reactions of 4 or 5 average men and women to Japanese aggression. I'd like to get yours, and before you give this reaction, would you please identify yourself?
I am Dr. James J. Terrell of Dallas, Texas, a practicing physician limiting my practice to mental and nervous diseases. I've been practicing for about 39 years. I grew up in Texas, although I was born in Missouri. Grew up in a small town, taught school for 2 years before I studied medicine, and then taught in the medical college at Galveston for about 11 years. And since then I've been practicing mental and nervous diseases. You asked about my reaction to the news of the Japanese aggression. First, it was unbelieving surprise, and then a horror that any nation could so attack another nation while negotiations were still going on. After I realized that the news was true, then the next realization was that I personally was at war. Not the country was at war, but that I was at war. That everything that I had and all that I could do should go into it. Realizing, of course, my physical limitations, I felt that everything else I had and could do should be devoted to the cause of winning the war. I don't believe in war as a way of settling things, but I do believe that it is the only method sometimes forced on us, and that if we get into it, that the quickest way that we can win the war will be the one that will save the most lives. Just what my contribution will be will have to be determined by those who know the full program and full picture. In the meantime, until I'm told what I'm going to do, or what I should do, I'm going to go ahead with my daily duty, the work that I've been doing, supplementing that with such suggestions and help as I myself can think of giving. Cooperating thoroughly with those in authority insofar as my ability goes.
This is John Lomax interviewing Mike Stevens at Dallas, Texas, December the 10th, 1941. Where were you born, Mike?
I was born in Louisiana, in Caddo Parish, 1907.
And how long have you lived in Dallas?
Well, I've been living in Dallas ever since 1934, which is about 7 years.
Well, what are you doing in Dallas?
While I'm working in Dallas, I'm a houseman, chauffeur, cook, and a yard man.
Washington wants to know, Mike, what do you think about this war with Japan?
Well, my thoughts about the war, which I've been thinking over for some considerable time and reading, are I figure we have a hard task to do. It is because since our friendship with our assistant countries, there's nothing for us to do but go into it with all force, with all might, and with all strength. And ask God to teach us and to direct us the right path, that we'll conceive the right thing, that we'll come out more than conquer.
Well, what do the in general think about this situation, Mike?
Well, the general colored people, I believe they will speak the same portion with me, what I'm saying now. Is because in talking with different ones, they talk the same thing.
Well, do you find them willing to bear their part and pick up arms and fight for their country?
Well, yes. I believe they feel like I felt when the news heard over radio that Japan had declared war on the United States. Everybody felt in sorrow and woke up with a strong determination mind is to go forward, to do the best they could. It's because this is our country, and this is our place to live, and everything is here is prepared for us, and we don't want no other dictator over us.